London has been paying their respects to those that served in the First World War. And there are, of course, many events that are taking place throughout the day today. Yesterday was Remembrance Sunday, today Armistice Day. And I wanted to reflect upon this throughout the show. Well, I'm joined live in the studio now with James Priestman, who is a poet, and his work as a social worker in a mental health team. He's often seen performing at Paddington Station. He's previously served as a captain in the Light Infantry, also known as the Rifles. And he's spent the last 48 hours with commuters at Paddington Station and has more. James, it's so lovely to meet you, and thank you for coming into the studio.
Thanks, Shay. It's been great. Yes, I do my poetry under the name of James Pendle.
Yes.
And I do this sort of bespoke poet idea where I've been going out to people in the station and saying, look, it's Remembrance Day today. I'm doing poems at Paddington Station.
Yeah.
Would you like a poem about Remembrance Day? And
what's that been like? How have people received that? Because obviously the thing is, you're absolutely right. Yesterday, Remembrance Sunday, today, Armistice Day. It's a reflective mood that the whole nation is in. But when you're at a station, it must be said, especially a busy station like Paddington, people oftentimes are just on their way, trying to get somewhere or trying to get back home.
Yes.
So when there you are, you know, as a poet, as you mentioned, your poet name is James Pendleton. James Pendle, and it's James Pendle Poet on Instagram. When you're there, approaching people, they're busying, you know, scurrying away. Maybe they've got a coffee in one hand. Maybe they've got their suitcases. They're rushing back to get home for, you know, Sunday evening. And you're talking about, your poetry and Remembrance Sunday. How has that been received with the commuters?
I've done a lot of stuff at Paddington Station down. I'm effectively their poet in residence there.
Yes.
So I'm getting pretty good at identifying who's up for it, who's not.
Who's going to talk to you.
And it is interesting because you know, it's such a wide variety of people that are ready to listen to a poem. And Remembrance Day has been really interesting because people do come at it differently. I mean, I've met quite a few people who are service people either in the RAF, Navy or the Army, who have got grandparents who served or even were killed in the wars. But also now people like saying, one woman said to me, well, my daughter's in the RAF. You know, so there's people with serving children or siblings in the forces. And then I also met somebody today actually who said, when I said what I was doing, she said, well, I would like a poem, but I'm totally against Remembrance Day.
Really?
I'm a pacifist, and I think it glorifies war. So what I do is I've got a memory bank of poems, my own poems and other people's, that are relevant to the subject. So I recited for her W.H. Auden's poem, The Shield of Achilles. W.H. Auden wrote in the early 20th century, and he was very against war. Because I didn't really want to try and convert her. I don't think it's the right time to do that.
Sure.
But I wanted to share something to say, well, I also think war is a terrible thing as well. And so did W.H. Auden, and that's something that we can agree on together. Yes,
I think you're absolutely right, actually, in the way that you describe it. And I mean, some people will say today is not the day to discuss the disparities of war. Others will say today is absolutely that day, because it's in our psyche, it's in our minds. You know, I think for anyone, however, when we focus on world wars and World War I, the way in which it's impacted future generations, and that's us, we're the future generations, you know, from decades ago, it's quite something for us to be able to reflect and take that time to meet with people who have different thoughts, who have different perspectives, as you've just said. But at the same time, using the medium of poetry to actually express what sometimes many of us cannot say. That's powerful to me.
Yes, it is.
I must say, that is very powerful.
I think honestly that the war poets, the great war poets, are very well, and a lot of people have learnt about them in school. And I think it's because I think the poetry and death go well together, basically. I think a lot of people write poems when someone's died. If someone's died, they will write a poem about it. It's a way of dealing with their grief and trauma. And so I think there's something about poetry at Remembrance Day that's important.
Why did you decide? I'm just intrigued. Was there a personal reason for you as to why you decided to take, as I mentioned, this massive feat on spending the last 48 hours at Paddington Station and reciting various poems, some of which, of course, are your own? Where did that all come about for you?
Yeah, well, I've been into poetry, if you like, since I was quite young.
Sure.
And then I had this idea of going into stations and doing poetry for people sort of 6 months ago, and I started doing it unofficially. And then I showed a video of myself of what it was to someone called Lorna Adams, who's in charge of that kind of thing at the station, and she thought it was great. And so now I have ID, and she's talking about sort of making me the resident poet there.
Wow.
So that's really nice. And then, but I mean, specifically for Remembrance Day, obviously it's important for me personally. I served in the army, and I have a good friend who was killed in the terrible war in Afghanistan.
My condolences.
I can't really say any more than that as to why it's important to me.
But it's interesting, I think, because whenever I am fortunate enough to meet with individuals who either have family members who have served or they themselves have served, it's a lasting experience and memory throughout your life. Would you say that's the same for you?
Yes, I think it's true. And I think because you make very close friendships, very good friendships.
Yes.
But also then there's a sense in which the friendships are fragile as well in terms of what might happen.
Sure.
But I think that...
There is a connection. I hope you don't mind me interjecting.
No.
It comes across to me as a civilian that there is a deep-rooted connection that anyone who has served in the armed forces has comparatively to those of us that are civilians, that in a way it's undescribable. It's not something that you can maybe even put into words. And I only have seen that through speaking to individuals like yourself and seeing that the passion and how those memories stay with you are so deep rooted that I don't think, and if you haven't perhaps been in the armed forces, you know, whether voluntary or not, whatever that capacity may be, there's a deep rooted connection there.
Yes, I think it does, and it's probably lots of reasons for that. But I think it's certainly true. Whoever you speak to, I think, will say that it's rare to meet someone, although someone might have terrible experiences in the armed services.
Yes,
I think it's rare to meet people who regret joining.
Right.
And I think most people would say that they made their most intense friendships at that time. Yes.
And so poetry for you, would you say, a form of therapy? Is it something that you absolutely love? What is it about performing poetry that is so important to you?
Yeah, I think I'm a bit of an actor.
Okay.
I'm interested. I mean, being a social worker, I'm interested in people.
Performative side of it.
I do love the performance. Yeah, I do.
Yeah.
And I'm a social worker, so I'm interested in people.
Sure.
And my poems tend to be, I mean, the poem I'm going to do today is unusual in that it's my voice, I'm speaking. But usually I create a character that speaks the poem.
I see.
And so, and I enjoy all of that.
So I have to say to you, because for me, I find it, and I wonder if you've explored this yourself, perhaps, you know, speaking to other poets. I've always found it harder to read poetry as opposed to seeing it being performed. I love it. I absolutely love to see poetry live.
Yes.
In my younger days, I remember being at university and they used to have, in our students' union, like, I think it was on a Thursday night, they'd have like a live poetry session.
Right. Okay.
And I just used to go, even though I don't know a word of poetry, I must tell you.
Right.
But I just used to love seeing it live. And that connection didn't necessarily come across to me as much when I would try and read it.
Yes.
What's your take?
Yes, well, first of all, I think one of the nice things when I've done this bespoke poetry, I've said to people, like on National Poetry Day I was there and doing poems, and people have said to me, oh, I've got a poem that I remembered from school, can I say it to you?
Yes.
And so a lot of people do like speaking poems, but there aren't the opportunities, you know,
Exactly.
when do I get to do this?
Yeah.
So that's one thing. I think there's lots of different kinds of poems.
Sure.
I think there are poems that are written for the page and that you need to see them on the page because you need to perhaps go back and look at them and spend time over them. And there are poems that the impact is immediate and the meaning can be communicated very much by the tone of voice,
Sure.
by the expression.
I mean, that's why, you know, I'll interview, very fortunate we have a really creative arts industry here in London, and I'll interview individuals like yourself that are poets, but others that will call themselves spoken word artists. And I'm always intrigued by that title because I think actually that's what really entices me, is the spoken word piece. When it is read out aloud, or in your case, in memory. How many poems do you know off by heart then?
Oh, over 50.
Oh my goodness. How does that work then, James? Do you wake up in the morning and refresh? And I mean,
if I'm on the bus, you know, I'll say a poem in my head. So it's all sort of muscle memory, isn't it? You say things over and over in your head and it sticks. So and perhaps I'm lucky, and perhaps it comes easier to me than to some people, and I know I enjoy it. So it's easy to do something if you know you enjoy it.
I'm going to ask you you a very odd question, but I want to ask you it anyway, because I think a lot of our listeners will be thinking this. It's kind of like choosing your favourite child, but do you have a favourite poem that you love?
Oh, well, that sorry, yeah, that is a terribly hard question. I really wish you had to answer.
I'm sorry.
Yeah, so I've just been at the last weekend. I was at the Friday and Saturday. I was at the Poetry Festival in Aldborough in Suffolk, and I heard some great poets there, like Caroline Bird was there, Imtiaz Darka.
Yeah.
But a favourite poem, I think I might go for As I Walked Out One Evening by W.H. Auden. He talks about him going on a walk, his concerns about life and death and time, and the fact that you can't conquer time. Is love ever real and true? He has all these terrible doubts, and he exaggerates these doubts in his mind. And then at the end, he kind of comes to this place of relative calm, where he's kind of dealt with all of that. And I kind of feel that's what I try to do in my poems, and including the poem that I'll do now, is put out there all the confusion that I was feeling, and then try to find some resolution.
Well, I think it is a perfect opportunity for us now to enjoy some live poetry here on BBC Radio London. So James Pendle is the name for your poetry, and people can go to Instagram, James Pendle Poet. So over to you, James, for your performance.
Thank you very much. Thank you. Yeah, so the poem relates how I became aware of the death of a friend of mine in the terrible war in Afghanistan when I saw his face on the front of a newspaper. And inside the newspaper, there was an account commemorating the 40th anniversary of Neil Armstrong and Buzz Aldrin's landing on the moon, and also Michael Collins, who stayed in the Apollo spacecraft and circled round. And these things became confused, mixed in my mind. And anyway, this is the poem. Breakfast, 3rd of July, 2009. Turning to the paper's middle pages, I'm reminded that 40 years ago, those men were sent in such a fragile craft that President Nixon rehearsed a speech to tell us they wouldn't be coming back. Buzz had brains of a rocket scientist and the courage of a fighter pilot. Neil Armstrong was a leader with the faith, I think, of an archbishop. And Michael Collins could wait alone, knowing some things can't be helped. And you, I hadn't expected to see you on the front of the newspaper. I had always thought that you'd come back, laughing with stories and Pashton carpets, to hide the sadder moments maybe, a sense of disquiet, well, perhaps. But I thought you'd be back from Helmand. I still have the Billy Bragg cassette you lent me at Sandhurst. You liked Philip Larkin. Humanity was a faith we shared. Observation, a gift we both practiced. I wanted to borrow some of your other gifts, but you could not offer them. And now what I never had isn't there. Just your face. No, I mean your faith. At breakfast.
My goodness, thank you so much, James Pendle. What a beautiful piece. The line that stood out to me there, humanity was a faith we shared. I mean, that's quite something. And you can just tell that our listeners cannot see you, but the emotion, the expression is just as vitally important as you deliver that spoken word piece. How long did it take you to write that? It was absolutely beautiful. Thank you.
So I find my poems, some take a long time and some quite quickly, and that was quite quick. That
really?
one, it was basically
very
that
raw.
day. Yeah, it was. I mean, I sort of wrote the first draft that day, and then there was a lot of other things that I was obviously going through my mind, and then over the next week or so, I kind of fine-tuned it, and but the basic idea of it was what I felt, so it kind of went down that day.
It's I always see singer-songwriters, filmmakers and poets like yourself as wizards. I don't quite know how you do it, because if I was to ever put my pen to paper, I end up just writing down to-do lists of what I need to do. So it is honestly amazing to me the way in which you are able to use the exact same English language that I speak, that we all speak, and through the wizardry of words, put emotions to paper in a way that many others can't, and paint pictures through your poetry. So that was really beautiful, James. Thank you
very much. Well, thank you very much for giving me the opportunity to share it.
It's such a pleasure having you. Just before I let you go, I did want to talk about the fact that it's also the 200-year anniversary of the RNLI, and they had a choir today, didn't they?
Yes, they did. Yes, I was at the...
How was that?
At Paddington Station, they had a lovely service put on for Remembrance Day at the memorial there in the station, and it's also the 200th anniversary of the RNLI. Obviously, another dangerous job, and so there was a choir there from of serving RNLI seamen and sea women.
Yes,
and they put on a beautiful performance of sea shanties that they'd learnt.
Amazing.
It was lovely because it kind of, obviously, it's a sombre, solemn occasion.
Yes.
And they sang some solemn songs, and then kind of when the silence was over and the service was over, they sang some sort of slightly lighter, slightly jovial ones, which was it felt a nice and appropriate way to end things.
Absolutely. It's an important day, and it's one that we must continue to talk about throughout the year as well. James, so lovely having you here.
Thank you. It's been...
Are you going to publish your poetry, or is it out and available?
Yeah, so I haven't got a collection published at the moment. I've had poems published in poetry journals, which I'm pleased about, and I'm kind of, at the moment, looking for a publisher.
Absolutely. Yeah. Well, so if anyone's listening, never know.
If the publisher's listening, please get in touch,
James,
because I'm looking for the right one.
You never know who's listening to Radio London. So let's give your details. It's James Pendle Poet on Instagram, and people can touch base with you that way, can't
That's right.
they?
Yeah,
and
thank you.
Of course, they can always find you at Paddington Station.
Or at Paddington Station. Around Christmas time, I'll be back. So
it'd be lovely to have you come back in. Would you be up for coming back in during Christmas time?
Yeah. Talk about some Christmas poems and stuff.
I
it'd be great.
love that. Lovely having you in the studio, and thank you for joining me today, James.
Thank you so much.